If we take a look at the green layer by closing up the level red layer and set up a small scale animation, we can see that, again, both of these scale parameters are linked. Now, by scrubbing in the timeline, we can see that there is an animation for the green layer on the scale parameter. Just because there are keyframes currently on this layer doesn't mean we can further enhance it by adding an expression. Make sure that you have the Alt key or the Option key on a Mac depressed when you click on the stopwatch, or you run the risk of turning off all of the keyframes for that parameter. Now we see that we have the JavaScript, as we would expect, telling this parameter to do what it's already been told to do. If we use Enter on the number pad, although we have an expression, that expression is telling the parameter to use scale. The scale has been controlled by keyframes. So if we scrub the playhead in the timeline, we're not going to see any change yet. Instead, we'll use the pick whip and navigate up to the rotation value for the knob again. We'll use Enter on the number pad to accept it and open up the window to see more of our expression. Again, After Effects has created two lines, one with a variable indicating the rotation of the knob layer and putting the scale into both the X and the Y value. Rather than putting a single value into the X or the Y, we want to use the animation described by our keyframes for the Y value. Because this is X and Y, we could click on the expression to modify the array, then by clicking and highlighting the second variable, type in a new JavaScript that would define the keyframes set forth by our scale animation. But it's much easier than that. With the second variable highlighted in the array, I'll simply use the pick whip and this time choose the Y value in my scale. When I release the mouse, you'll see that After Effects has put in the value for scale 1 from this transformation. What's happening here is the expression is now using the variable from temp, which is the rotation from the layer knob, as the X value. For the Y value, it's using the keyframe data as described by the second value in our scale array. I'll use Enter on the number pad to see what it looks like now. We can see that animation still occurs as it's driven by the keyframes in our animation. Now, the knob only describes the width of that green layer and the width of the red layer as well. Here in the array, you may suspect that the scale is coming from the first value in the original scale array, X and Y. Instead of counting from 1, After Effects counts the array from 0. So the first value in the scale would be 0, the next would be 1, and on a 3D layer, a third value might be defined as scale, open bracket, 3, and then a close bracket after that. Let's take a look at one more level of expressions using a little more math. We'll close up the green layer and turn off the visibility for the first level red. We'll turn on the visibility for level red 2. If we open up the scale parameter for this layer by typing S on the keyboard, we can see that it has, again, its own scale value, and we can add an expression to it by holding down the Alt key or the Option key on a Mac, then clicking on the stopwatch. Again, we can link this to the rotation for the knob by simply using the pick whip and accepting it by pressing Enter on the number pad. This is going to work exactly the same as it did when we had our previous red layer. The scale will be described by the number of degrees in our rotation. However, you may want to change this expression so that the scale is described by the number of revolutions rather than the number of degrees. To do this, we'll need a little bit more math, and I promise it won't hurt. Our variable is described as, in this comp, there's a layer called knob. There's a transformation that is rotation, and that will describe the value for scale. But we can modify this phrase with a little simple math. First, let's edit the expression by clicking in the dialog box. Then we'll add a parentheses at the beginning of the phrase. We'll add a close parentheses at the end of the phrase. Note that I've added the parentheses before the semicolon at the end of this line. This is one whole value that I'm taking from the layer. I'm going to divide this by 3.6. There are 360 degrees in a single revolution, and dividing this by 3.6 will deliver a number between 0 and 100. If I use Enter on the number pad, I can see that this value now, my 360 degrees rotation, is now divided by 3.6, delivering me about 105% with a rotation of 381 degrees. I'll take off the additional degrees to see how this is working. So with one full revolution, the red level has only made it to 100%. If I change the value of rotation, say to an even half by using 0 revolutions and only 180 degrees, I can see that now the scale is 50%. As I did before, I'll change the Y value so that it always maintains a steady 100%. I'll click on the second part of the array and type in 100. Make sure that you don't have any additional syntax, that is, stray characters inside this phrase, or After Effects will be confused by the language or the syntax that you've typed in. Once you're happy with it, go ahead and hit Enter to accept it. Now the rotation for the red layer will only create a value of 100% with every full revolution that it makes.